In the year 39 AD, Rome woke under a strange silence. Not the normal quiet of early morning, but something heavy and tense that even the market crowds couldn't break. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath, afraid to name what everyone could feel but nobody dared say out loud. Up on the Palatine Hill, the Imperial palace glowed white in the dawn light, isolated and watching over the city like it was guarding a terrible secret. Inside those walls, something was taking shape. Not just another political scheme like the ones Rome had seen 1,000 times before. This was different. This had the power to shake even the most experienced senators, men who thought they'd seen every kind of corruption power could create. Some claimed they heard whispers at night. Others swore the corridors carried echoes that didn't sound human. But everyone agreed on one thing. The empire was changing, and not for the better. Caligula, Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, had taken the throne at just 24. Rome, exhausted by Tiberius's dark reign, had welcomed him like a savior. The people called him their liberator, the young ruler who would restore dignity to the empire. At first, everything seemed perfect. Grand games, public pardons, promises of a new beginning. But while the crowd screamed his name in the arenas, another Caligula was emerging inside the palace. His shadow grew darker, fed not just by mood swings, but by cold, calculated decisions. The Romans believed power made men better. In Caligula's case, power lit something else on fire, a hunger to bend the court to his most private, unreachable will. At the heart of that transformation, a hidden system began to operate, a machine that always started the same way, with the arrival of young virgins at the palace. Officially, it was an honor. Imperial families were told their daughters had been chosen to serve near the emperor, to be close to the sacred center of power. Unofficially, it was a mystery wrapped in uncomfortable silence that stretched from the richest mansions down to the poorest homes. The marble walls of the palace, admired by so many, became silent witnesses to a system almost nobody dared to name. And while Rome slept, new carriages climbed the hill, carrying girls dressed in white, believing they were heading toward privilege. They didn't know that they were entering a place where purity wasn't just virtue, it was currency. Where innocence wasn't just required, it was destiny. The mystery of the Palatine didn't start with blood in the streets or public executions. It was born from the gap between what was said and what really happened. That emptiness, even 2,000 years later, still sends a chill down the spine. Because behind every curtain and marble column, there hid an uncomfortable truth. What looked like glory was sometimes just the entrance to an abyss disguised as privilege. And it's right there, on that edge between appearance and shadow, where this story begins. To understand the scale of what Caligula was building inside the palace, you have to look at the machine that fed it. The selection of young girls. A process dressed up as noble tradition, but in reality working like a well-oiled machine built to satisfy the whims of power. Imperial officers moved through Rome with the cold precision of tax collectors. They weren't looking for talent or skill. They were looking for three things: age, beauty, and purity. Three conditions that became the keys to the heart of the palace. They visited rich homes and poor ones, judging faces, checking family backgrounds, and demanding proof of that one thing families felt pressured to guarantee: honor. In a world where honor meant everything, few families questioned the process. Many competed for it, convinced that being chosen was like receiving a blessing from the gods. Rome lived in deep contradiction. After Tiberius's death, people wanted a bright, noble leader who would give the empire back its dignity. Caligula seemed perfect for the role. Young, handsome, from a respected bloodline. Families imagined their daughters at religious ceremonies, serving the emperor's sister, learning the refinements of court life. Nobody wanted to see the truth, not even when rumors started spreading about private rituals, midnight gatherings, and rooms that only certain officials ever entered. With time, ancient writers like Suetonius would mention a hidden space within the palace known as the Garden of Venus. Beautiful name. Disturbing meaning? It was a restricted section, built with polished marble and decorated with imported fabrics. The chosen girls lived there. Their rooms were luxurious, almost blinding. Perfumes from Arabia, silks dyed with rare pigments, lamps burning day and night. Any visitor might have thought it was a sanctuary of privilege. But that splendor was only the surface. The Garden of Venus worked as a subtle prison, a place where nothing seemed to hurt at first glance, but everything quietly broke them inside. The girls couldn't leave without permission. They were given servants who seemed helpful, but whose real job was to watch. No clear schedules, no explanations, no promises. Each day began the same way, with uncertainty, and that uncertainty slowly ate away at their minds. None of them knew when they'd be called, or why one girl was chosen over another, or what waited beyond the door connecting the garden to the emperor's private corridors. The waiting became a constant echo, whispering that they controlled nothing. Everything was designed to gently break their will, to turn them into obedient shadows inside a system no one admitted existed. Sometimes they were walked through the corridors during special occasions, like living trophies of imperial prosperity. Their white tunics, supposedly symbols of purity, stood in brutal contrast to the unspoken truth. Meanwhile, secret records on wax tablets listed every detail: name, age, appearance, behavior. This wasn't a passing fantasy. It was an institution, a structure so calculated that no one could intervene or ask too many questions. In this system, youthful beauty became political currency, and silence was the only unbreakable law. In that closed world where sunlight barely reached and every move was watched, the story of a girl named Livia began to take shape. Her story would show how far the imperial court could go in destroying even the most innocent souls. Livia was 14 when her life changed forever. She was the daughter of a respectable family, raised in courtesy, discipline, and obedience. For her father, the visit of the imperial officials was a blessing. For her mother, it was a proud but trembling honor. In a Rome where prestige meant survival, giving a daughter to the palace wasn't seen as a loss, but as advancement. No one in that house asked what really stood behind that invitation. On the day she left for the Palatine, Livia wore a freshly woven white tunic and an amber necklace her mother had saved for years. As the carriage rolled over the cobblestones, the city seemed to watch her. Some looked with admiration, others with envy mixed with silent pity. "You'll make us proud," her mother had whispered, tears in her eyes, but a smile forced on her lips. No one said aloud what they truly feared. That imperial glory always came with a price. Livia's first days in the palace were confusing. No harshness, no cold distance. Instead, everything was wrapped in strange, artificial kindness. Scented baths with Eastern oils, silk tunics so soft they seemed to melt between her fingers, fruits and honey she'd never seen at home. Servants smiled at every movement, anticipating her slightest wish. It was all too perfect, too calculated. Hospitality that didn't aim to calm her, but to disarm her. Livia, like many girls her age, still believed virtue was always rewarded. She imagined serving Drusilla, the emperor's beloved sister, or joining some ceremonial group, learning song, dance, philosophy. She couldn't imagine that this treatment was only the first layer of a web designed to reshape how she saw the world. "You must be excited to be here," a servant said with a practiced smile. "I am honored," Livia replied softly, though her hands trembled slightly. The court worked like a theater of shadows. What was visible always hid what truly mattered. The corridors were long and eerily quiet. Too many doors, too many guards standing too still. Everything soaked in a feeling of waiting. Waiting without explanation, but not without purpose. The call came during one of the palace's evening gatherings. Servants entered her room without raising their voices, as if performing a ritual repeated dozens of times. They handed her a white tunic different from the others, finer, almost translucent under the lamplight. For the first time, Livia felt a tremor under her skin. She didn't know why, but something in the fabric, in the servants' eyes, in the tense air around her, warned her she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. They were leading her toward a place the palace spoke of only in murmurs, a space designed not for ceremony or study, but for something far more calculated. And as Livia crossed the threshold of the Garden of Venus for the first time, she realized the palace had layers she hadn't even begun to understand. The Garden of Venus looked nothing like a prison. It was beautiful in a way that almost crushed the breath out of her. Marble floors with rose-colored patterns, drapes of silk so thin they moved with the faintest breath of air. Glass lamps hanging like floating stars, the scent of flowers seemed to cling to her skin with each step. For a moment, the overwhelming luxury confused her. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe her unease had just been childish fear. But then she noticed the guards. 2 at the entrance, 2 more at the far end of the hallway. None blinking, none shifting, all watching the girls as if they weren't people, but fragile objects that might shatter or misbehave. Livia followed the others into a large chamber where cushions and low couches formed a circle. Some girls looked no older than she was, others perhaps a year or 2 more, all dressed in white, all silent. A servant approached, placed a tray of fruit and honey near her hands, and whispered one instruction only. Wait. That was all. Wait. Not for whom, not for what, not for how long. She sat down slowly, still trembling, and watched the others for clues. Some stared at the floor, faces blank, bodies still. Others looked toward the doors every few breaths, as if expecting someone. A few seemed lost in their own minds, eyes distant, movements mechanical. Livia tried to speak to the girl beside her. The girl didn't even look up. And so Livia waited. Minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. The palace seemed to exist outside time. At some point, a servant returned. Without a word, he beckoned 2 girls. They rose immediately, heads bowed as if pulled by invisible strings. He led them through a side corridor, and the door closed with a soft but final sound. The other girls didn't react. No whisper, no look, no question, as if silence were the only language allowed. As days passed, Livia discovered the true nature of the Garden of Venus. It wasn't a place of service. It was a cage painted with gold, a quiet mechanism designed not to punish, but to shape. The girls were groomed, bathed, perfumed, taught how to walk, how to stand, how to keep their faces calm regardless of what their hearts screamed. Expected to smile when told to, bow when asked, obey without hesitation. At first, Livia resisted in her thoughts. She told herself she could stay strong, that she could understand what was happening and escape its pull. But the routines were relentless. Every morning she woke without knowing what the day would bring. Uncertainty gnawed at her through every hour. Breakfast came at different times. Lessons happened or didn't. Servants appeared unexpectedly, sometimes asking her to change her tunic, sometimes demanding she remain seated for long stretches. Once she was allowed to walk through a small courtyard filled with statues. The next day she wasn't permitted to leave her room at all. Nothing had rhythm. Nothing had meaning. The unpredictability itself became the instrument of control. Girls began to break in quiet, unspoken ways. One who had once tried to ask questions stopped talking altogether. Another, who had arrived with bright eyes and restless hands, fell into long spells of trembling that left her too exhausted to move. A few cried silently at night, careful never to let a sound escape. Livia felt her own edges beginning to blur. Memories of home became softer, as if wrapped in thick fog. Her mother's face, once warm and clear, grew harder to picture. Her father's voice faded into something faint and unreachable. The palace replaced their presence with cold, structured emptiness. Caligula visited the Garden of Venus rarely, but when he did, the atmosphere changed instantly. The air tightened. Girls straightened their backs. Servants whispered frantically behind the scenes. His steps echoed down the corridor long before he appeared. The emperor loved that effect, loved the power of fear rippling ahead of him like a tide. He would walk slowly, his eyes drifting over the girls as if inspecting artworks or livestock. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his questions were light, casual, almost gentle. How are you sleeping? Do you like your new tunic? Are they treating you well? Each question felt like a trap lined with silk. Each smile felt like a knife hidden behind polished marble. Livia answered as she'd been instructed. Politely, softly, without revealing the storm inside her. But Caligula had a talent for sensing weakness. He paused before her longer than before others. "You're new," he said once, tilting his head as if studying a puzzle. "I remember you." Livia nodded, unable to force a word from her throat. "Good," he murmured. "I like when they remember their place." Her heart stuttered. After he left, the girls remained frozen until the last echo of his footsteps faded. Only then did they release their breaths in unison, a quiet wave of relief that never lasted long. The emotional manipulation became a pattern. Caligula alternated between cold indifference and unexpected kindness. Sometimes he ignored the girls entirely for days, letting them stew in anxiety. Other times he sent gifts, a bracelet, a flower, a sweet cake. These gestures confused their minds, tangling fear with desperate gratitude. It didn't matter that the generosity was hollow. The palace made them crave any sign of approval, however small. Livia wasn't immune. She hated herself for it. But part of her felt a twisted relief when the emperor acknowledged her. The Garden of Venus was a world where rare moments of attention could feel like oxygen. And that was precisely what made the system so effective. The girls were too isolated to form alliances. Whenever two grew close, the palace separated them. Different chambers, different routines, different duties. Friendships were dangerous. Support systems were threats. Caligula understood that unity gave strength, and strength invited resistance. So he kept them fragmented, drifting alone inside their gilded cage. For Livia, nights were the worst. Darkness brought memories she tried to forget and fears she couldn't silence. She lay awake listening to soft footsteps in the corridor, wondering if that night would be the one she'd be called again. Every sound became a question. Every minute stretched long and thin like a thread about to snap. Some girls whispered prayers to gods who never answered. Others pressed their hands to their ears to muffle the faint, distant noises that haunted the palace. Sharply cut-off cries, hurried steps, hushed arguments behind closed doors. Livia heard them too, and sometimes, when exhaustion weighed her down, she wondered if those sounds were real or if her mind had begun to fracture like the others. But even in the depths of their fear, the girls learned one truth. The palace wanted silence. Silence was obedience. Silence was survival. And silence became the rule they lived by. Outside the palace walls, Rome carried on with its noise and chaos. No one imagined that hidden inside the empire's symbol of power was a labyrinth where innocence was slowly erased. Families went about their lives believing their daughters were serving honorably, imagining them surrounded by marble and music, completely unaware of the psychological unraveling happening behind locked doors. If someone had told the truth, would the city have listened? Livia doubted it. Rome loved its illusions too much. And inside the Garden of Venus, illusions were the chains that bound them. Soft, gilded, and impossible to break. The collapse of the system did not begin with mercy. It did not begin with someone finally acknowledging the cruelty inside the palace. It began, like so many turning points in Roman history, with an insult and a man who refused to forget it. Cassius Chaerea, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, had endured Caligula's humiliation for months. The emperor mocked his voice, his manner, even the way he requested orders. Each insult was delivered publicly, designed to cut deep and leave a wound that could never heal. Venus, Caligula would say with a smirk when giving Chaerea the watchword, mocking his voice as effeminate. Or perhaps Priapus. Which suits you better today, Chaerea? The other guards would stifle their laughter. Chaerea would stand rigid, jaw clenched, saying nothing. In a court driven by fear, Chaerea's resentment was a quiet ember waiting for a spark. That spark finally came. Behind the scenes, whispers turned into discreet meetings. A handful of officers, men who had sworn to protect the emperor, began discussing the unspoken truth. Caligula's rule was pushing Rome toward chaos. They did not conspire out of compassion for the girls hidden in the Garden of Venus, nor to restore justice. They conspired for themselves, for their honor, their power, their survival. On the 24th of January, in the year 41, the palace experienced the kind of silence that only comes before catastrophe. Caligula walked through a dimly lit corridor after attending a midday performance. His mood was light, almost playful. He had no idea that just ahead in the shadows, men waited with trembling hands and blades ready. When the attack came, it was fast, brutal, a storm of steel breaking through flesh and bone. "Take that," Chaerea shouted as he struck the first blow. Caligula fell not before a foreign enemy, not before a rebellion of slaves or senators, but before the very guards meant to shield him from harm. The emperor who had terrified Rome died on cold marble, surrounded by men who once bowed at his feet. For the first time in years, the palace did not echo with commands or music or forced celebrations. It echoed with footsteps running in every direction, guards fleeing, servants screaming, officials trying desperately to decide whether to hide or curry favor with whoever came next. That chaos spilled into every corner of the Palatine, including the Garden of Venus. The girls did not understand what was happening at first. They heard shouts, doors slamming, the distant clatter of armor. Servants rushed through hallways without stopping to bow or offer instructions. The predictable, suffocating rhythm of palace life, so carefully maintained, collapsed in an instant. Livia stood frozen in her chamber, clutching the thin fabric of her tunic. She felt something unfamiliar spreading inside her chest. Not hope, not yet, but movement, possibility. A servant burst into the room, eyes wide, breath unsteady. He didn't speak to her. He didn't offer orders. He simply ran past her and vanished into the corridor. Others followed, their footsteps chaotic and uncoordinated. Then something extraordinary happened. A door was left open, not locked, not guarded, simply open. Some girls reacted instinctively. They ran barefoot, stumbling over the polished floors. Their breaths came in short gasps, not from exertion, but from shock. Shocked that there were no voices shouting after them, no hands pulling them back, no guards blocking the way. But not all of them moved. Some remained seated, staring straight ahead as if unable to believe what they were seeing. For them, freedom was too abstract, too unreal. They had been caged so long that the idea of leaving felt as threatening as staying. "Come on," one girl whispered urgently to another who sat motionless. "Come on, we have to go." But the girl just shook her head slowly, eyes empty. Livia stood between those two worlds, fear gripping her ankles, instinct pushing her forward. She placed one foot outside the room, then another, until she found herself in the corridor. Screams echoed in the distance. The palace trembled like a beast struck in the heart. And then she did something she hadn't done in months. She ran. The cold marble against her feet was a shock, but it grounded her. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she followed the flow of other girls who had found the same moment of courage. They moved like a small flock of birds escaping a net. Unsteady, directionless, but driven by survival. Some guards saw them but did nothing. Others turned away. A few even gestured silently for them to keep going. Fear, loyalty, confusion, all of it was collapsing at the same speed. By the time they reached the outer courtyards, the palace had become a battlefield of indecision. No one knew who was in charge. No one knew if Caligula's killers would be celebrated or crucified. No one wanted to be the first to make the wrong choice. That hesitation saved lives. Livia stepped out into open air for the first time in what felt like years. The sky above her seemed larger than she remembered. Too bright, too real. She blinked rapidly, disoriented. She didn't cry. Not yet. Her body was too focused on running. Girls scattered through the gardens, down the pathways, toward the city gates. Some were intercepted by sympathetic servants. Others simply vanished into the streets, swept up by the anonymity of the crowd. Freedom did not come in a noble speech or an official decree. It came in a moment of confusion, a crack in the machine, a collapse of control. When Claudius was declared emperor soon after, he faced a problem no manual of statecraft had prepared him for: the existence of dozens of young women who had lived as ghosts inside the palace. Acknowledging them meant acknowledging the horror. So he chose the easier path: silence. The girls were returned to their families quietly, with no witnesses, no public admission, no explanation. Carriages left the Palatine under the cover of dusk, each carrying a girl along with gifts. Coins, fabrics, little treasures meant not as comfort, but as payment. Payment for silence. Payment to keep the story buried. Most families accepted the gifts. What else could they do? Speaking out could mean ruin, rebellion, death. Others simply shut their doors and wept behind them, now forced to face the shattered versions of the daughters they had once known. For Livia, returning home felt like stepping into a life that didn't quite belong to her anymore. Her mother wept and embraced her, but Livia stood stiffly, unable to lift her arms. Her father placed a hand on her head, but she flinched without understanding why. "What did they do to you?" her mother whispered through tears. Livia couldn't answer. The words wouldn't come. Their house felt unfamiliar, too quiet, too safe. She couldn't trust its warmth, couldn't trust the softness of her own bed, couldn't trust the stillness of her own breath. At night, she woke screaming without making a sound. During the day, she walked like a shadow through rooms that once held her laughter. She avoided mirrors. She avoided sunlight. She avoided questions, especially the ones her parents didn't dare ask. Some wounds bleed outward. Hers bled inward. Days turned into weeks, then months. Life resumed around her. But inside her mind, the palace never truly ended. Every unexpected knock on the door made her heart race. Every raised voice sent a tremor through her body. The scent of incense or the flutter of silk could pull her back into memories she desperately wanted to erase. She was free, but she didn't feel free. Freedom was a place her body had reached, but her mind had not. Rome moved on quickly. Empires always do. Historians later debated whether the accounts of the Garden of Venus were exaggerated by Caligula's enemies. Some argued the stories were political inventions. Others pointed out that the number of independent sources describing similar patterns was too large to dismiss. But beyond the scholars, beyond the official records, there lived a quieter truth preserved in letters hidden inside walls, in whispered testimonies, in fragments of memory passed down through generations. All of them told the same story, not of a mad emperor alone, but of a system that allowed power to bend morality until it broke. A system where silence protected the powerful and destroyed the powerless. A system where the suffering of young women became invisible because acknowledging it meant exposing the empire's darkest flaw, its ability to ignore the humanity of those who had none of the empire's protection. Livia's story, like the stories of the others, did not end with triumph. It did not end with revenge. It did not end with justice. It ended with survival. And survival, though not the ending she deserved, was still a form of resistance. Because every memory preserved, every whisper that refused to fade, every truth that slipped through the cracks of the official narrative became a spark, small but enduring. A reminder that even the brightest empires cast long shadows, and that inside those shadows lived voices the world tried very hard not to hear. But they existed. They mattered. And remembering them is the only way to make sure the silence that once consumed them never rises again. If this forgotten history moved you, subscribe. Every subscription helps us unearth the next buried truth and fight historical erasure. We refuse to let their voices fade into the dust.